Thank you, everybody, for joining us this Thursday morning. My name is Isis Lopez, and I am the Engagement Manager for Development Services Department. We're here to talk about the Site Plan Lite and Infill Plat Ordinance and the updates that our city staff have. We have several representatives here from the City of Austin Development Services Department. We also have representatives from Watershed Protection Department, and I'll let them introduce themselves in a few minutes. Before we get started with the presentation, I do have some information on the engagement format that we will have today. So we will start with a presentation from staff, and so we will be sharing our screens and have that presentation. I'll note that this presentation is being recorded. And so we will, after the presentation, we will send everybody a copy of the recording along with a copy of the presentation. After the presentation, we'll have opportunities for questions and answers. So we do have some time allocated for that. We may not get to all of the questions and we may not have the answer to all the questions that we have. But we will answer as many as possible. And so once we compile those, we can also share those afterward. Please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and that kind of helps us capture and make sure that we get to your questions. So with that, I'll turn it over to Matt Holland from the Watershed Protection Department to introduce themselves, and then the rest of our colleagues as well. Matt?
Hey, good morning. My name is Matt Holland, and I work with the Watershed Protection Department as a regulatory policy analyst, working in Liz Johnston's group under the environmental officer. And I've been helping shepherd through this ordinance through the process, and it's been a long road, but really interesting. And I'm looking forward to having this good conversation with all you guys and all you stakeholders. We go around the horn to introduce. Is that right?
Yeah, I'll go next. Since you already said my name, Liz Johnston, I'm the interim environmental officer with the Watershed Protection Department. Rebecca?
Rebecca McKay. I'm a supervising engineer in the floodplain office of Watershed Protection.
I can go next.
Oh,
sorry.
No, go ahead, Jody.
Oh, thanks. Jody Kaswami, Division Manager, Land Use Review. I manage the team that does the drainage reviews for Development Services Department. And I'll turn it over to Brent.
Brent Lloyd, DSD Development Officer.
I'm Bryden Summers, the Land Development Rules Administrator with the Development Services Department.
Awesome.
Matt?
Okay, so I've got a presentation to offer and share. And so once and feel free to start asking questions or making comments as I go along. And then Isis will help us kind of round up all those questions, because some of the questions probably really similar, and we can answer those at the same time. Let's see. All right, share screen. Sorry about that. All right. Okay. All right. So this project does not have a very easy to off the tongue name. Infill Plats and Site Plan Lite Part 2 is the name of the ordinance. Once the meeting is over, we're also going to offer later today, we will share out a PDF of this presentation. It does have some links in it, things like the original Infill Plat and Site Plan Lite resolutions from council. You can see those blue underlined parts there. So there's a lot going on. I didn't try to cram everything into this one presentation, but there are a lot of moving parts to it, and it's pretty detailed. So basically, this is an ordinance that supports the Home 2 ordinance that council passed in 2024 that allowed subdivision of lots into smaller lots than the traditional 5750 square foot lot, and also supports the site plan light goals of council as well. Basically what they wanted to do, council wanted us staff to do, was to offer some streamlined non-zoning regulations to facilitate infill housing, increase housing choices. So one of the things the council was hearing from the development community was that it was very onerous and difficult to process these small scale housing projects, because they were basically, even a very, very tiny project was expected to follow the exact same rule structure and so forth as a very large project. And our rules were basically set up for those larger projects. And so it's not always logical that you would have the full book thrown at a very small project. And so staff agrees and took a hard look at which of those regulatory measures could be looked at. Council also explicitly said you need to balance the impacts of whatever changes you make on. In this case, I put in water quality and drainage. Those are watershed goals, but they had a number of other elements as well. And the focus of this ordinance is on the drainage code. And I know that a lot of stakeholders have commented on that. I know there's even been some concern. Hey, how come you're not looking? There's a lot more going on that have to do with transportation and Austin Water, Austin Energy, et cetera, that are also important details when you're going through the process. And in fact, we are looking at those things, and we are working with those other departments. Most of those issues are not code issues, though. And given that this is an ordinance, we are not including those at this time, but we are absolutely working on that as well. Staff is, and Brent Lloyd can speak more to that if you have more direct questions. But anyway, that's really important. It's just one line on here, maybe another one down below, but that's a big thing because we're looking at many other aspects, not just drainage. But this present ordinance is all about drainage. So where we are now is the Planning Commission met on December 12th and passed a version of the ordinance that they supported and forwarded for City Council's consideration. And they had been looking at our original staff ordinance and made some pretty key changes, pretty different. I had some pretty different concepts for those, which staff definitely considered and looked at. And then we created a kind of a revised staff ordinance based on the comments and the changes that the Planning Commission offered. And so those are the two main things we're looking at right now. Council will have two documents to look at as they move forward. And the council hearing is expected to be on Thursday, February 13th. They will have these two ordinances to consider. In the future, just relegated to just a single line item, but a whole lot of work in a lot of different areas, is we will address these additional non-zoning permitting elements. So today I'm going to describe the Infill Plat and site plan like proposals in some detail, and I'm going to offer some comparisons for drainage regulations with some of our peer cities like Dallas, Fort Worth, San Antonio, and Houston. And then we're going to have this is EC's set aside a pretty good chunk of time, so we're really hoping to be able to interact with you guys and answer as many questions as we can today during this meeting. But obviously, there probably will be some questions we won't have immediate answers for. We'll need to confer and do research or what have you. But we will get back with you on those as well. All right, I'll start with the first piece, which is infill plats. These are small scale subdivisions. The home one ordinance offered for the first time for all SF1, SF2, and SF3 zoned single family residential zoned parcels. And there are about 150,000 of these across the city, almost 160. And it offered the possibility that each of those could go to 3 units on a single lot. In the past, it had been either one unit or 2 units, depending on the zoning and the situation. But that was in December of 2023, I think. And then Home 2 said, well, you can have a smaller parcel than the traditional 5750 square foot lot. And so those are the lots we're talking about here. Now, we're going to introduce, staff is going to be recommending a threshold in here, kind of break point in the ordinance that is 11,500. And that is, it's a pretty wonky looking number. Why did we pick that? Well, it's actually twice the old 57 to 50 number. And so it literally is the size of property, which in the past could not have been further subdivided because you couldn't have, you know, each of the two pieces wouldn't have been big enough to actually be a legal lot. So we're going with the 5750 times 2 threshold here, and I'll explain more about that later. These larger lots, the 33,000 that are larger than 11,500, which is only around a fifth of the total. Not all of these, by the way, not all of these lots are going to be able to support infill subdivision for a variety of reasons. But so this is kind of oversimplified, but it shows you the number of lots in these two categories. We can talk more about that if you want. Q&A. So, and I think some of you guys will recognize some of these slides that I initially created for our October 4th stakeholder meeting that we had, where we had some good feedback as well. So this is kind of in Northeast Austin. It's just basically almost literally random neighborhood I just picked out using our mapping systems, but I'm overlaying a home one project on top of this. So in the past, maybe, let's just I don't even know where this is, but the exact street. But if you let's just say it used to be SF1 and now it can be SF. Now you can have up to two or three units. And in a lot of cases, people are going to run out of room on their site and they're just going to put 2 still. In fact, that is what we're seeing with the home one data that is available now online. You can our DSD staff have put together a good summary of what's going on and how many permits have come in. And most of the permits are coming in as 2-unit projects, not 3-unit projects, although there are a fair number of 3-unit projects. So let's just say these folks in this project here decide that they own that property, say, hey, we're going to put 2 units in. Great. So they go forward with no fanfare. There's no drainage requirements for this. Just like if you built a single home next to them, there would be no specific drainage requirements. You're not allowed to flood your neighbors. There's state laws and other plumbing code kinds of provisions that kick in terms of drainage for individual single family homes. And that too would apply to a home one project as well. But there's no special drainage code that kicks in at that point because this project's so small. We're assuming that a lot of that other stuff is handled in the subdivision phase. So here's another neighbor that wants to build literally the same project, except instead of just leaving it as one owner of both of these units, they want to split it out and make it so that 2 different families can own each of the lots. So you would hope, I think, that this would be pretty straightforward. That there's no real drainage difference between these 2 projects. The water coming off of each of these is really similar. Scales are similar. The designs are probably going to be similar or the same, but we put the applicant through a lot of extra steps to come up with this as a subdivision, because up till now we haven't had a way to discern between a very small project and a larger one. So our proposal is for these projects that are less than or equal to 11,500 square feet that we treat it the same as we would a building permit project next door. So same deal. So there are no special rules, no additional anything. You could, you're not supposed to create drainage issues and so forth, but at the scale we're talking about, we're not generally seeing very many of those kinds of issues. And there are recourses, and I know that's another community discussion that we can have. But this is we think that it is appropriate. And when I show you the peer city review. Our peer city of San Antonio has a really similar threshold of 10,000 square feet. It's very close to 11,500, where they say basically the same thing. And I think we're in good company with that. And they had some experience that led to that conclusion that I'll share as well. So I already went through some of this. In the past, you couldn't even subdivide something of this scale or smaller, and so. This will be the first time things like, except with some cottage lot kind of oddity exceptions, and so you wouldn't have to do a drainage study, you wouldn't have to do on-site detention, anything like that for this very small scale, because we're not asking that of individual homes either right next door. Okay, now there's probably many tens of thousands of lots that are eligible for this option at this point. So we're opening this up for quite a few properties. So the planning commission proposal was much more broad, and they basically said, recommended that if any of these projects, all the way up to 1.5 acres in size, if any of these projects just remain within their zoning impervious cover limits, that you would have no extra drainage requirements. And so at this scale, we're okay with that. I mean, honestly, every single project is going to stay within their impervious cover limit, or that's the idea. I know there's board of adjustment, issues that pop up here and there, but generally people stay within their impervious cover limits and don't propose going over, because they'd have to get a variance and so forth and go through commission, a process to get there. So basically, and they also mentioned what's it's a little wonky again, but they mentioned what's called the planning commission mentioned the Dallas affidavit system for self-certification. And sure enough, Dallas does have a system where they take, for individual single family building permit projects, if you're in the floodplain, you have to get this, you have to submit a grading plan for your project in the floodplain. But if you're not in the floodplain, then you can have the applicant can say, hey, I'm not going to create problems for my neighbors, and so I'm going to sign an affidavit, official piece of paper that says I'm not creating problems, and I will rectify them in the future if that happens. And we'll talk about that a little bit more later, but that's different than having the city staff review it. Okay, so that's the planning commission proposal. So far we're not that far apart on this one small scale issue. All right, so then we turn to the Infill Plat, to a larger size. You're above 11,500. Here's an example, 1/2 acre project. And city staff believes that this is this scale above 11,500 is large enough to additional kind of engineered attention, or to detailed attention. And we also recommend that it not exceed 1 acre in size as for this option. And so that would mean that if you're bigger than 1 acre, then you would follow the full code system, all requirements. So here's I know this is a terrible sketch. This is me attempting to put some units on there, and I think it's about what could happen. And so the planning commission proposal did propose up to 1.5 acres. That would be this is a 1/2 acre site, so it would be two more of these together would be the scale that they were recommending this apply to. So our city staff recommendation. So again, planning commission their version did not refer to topography or grading or anything else. The staff version has more nuance to it. The staff actually says, look, if you have a site where the runoff is conveniently going from your site into the public right of way, or maybe as a creek next to you or drainage easement or something like that, hey, that's great. That's best case scenario. That's where we want the water to go. And so if you're in that situation, you can do a simplified grading plan where you would just show where the water's going. Honestly, a homeowner could actually probably put this together using information off our website, and you wouldn't have engineered elements like ponds, or then there'd be no regional stormwater management program payments or anything like that with this proposal. So, and then development community representatives, when they saw this, were like, hey, that makes sense. We like the simplified version. That's great. But not that many sites are going to just happen to all drain to the public right of way. So what happens if that's the case? What do you do? So that is the next scenario here. The scenario 2 of 3 is that maybe you have some or all of your runoff goes to neighbors. Maybe some of this is going to the street, but you have some of it draining the neighbors. And so in many cases, you can actually get in with some earth moving equipment and so forth, and maybe create a swale or French drain or some other kinds of systems to redirect the water so it's not going on your neighbors and get it to the public right of way system. And so initially, so we this is a little more complicated. We want to make sure that somebody gets this right and has oversight, and somebody with sort of competency in this area is involved and make sure that the water does in fact that there's a good plan and it gets executed. And so initially we proposed that engineering be required. There'd be a regional stormwater management program payment. And then because we actually already, this is a really key point, we actually already have this in our drainage criteria manual. This system of doing this is already, it has been going on since 2019. And so we've been allowing projects up to 1 acre that are single family residential subdivisions to regrade and do this kind of thing. But we have oversight and we look at them and make sure they get their project done, and we ask for payment. So in our updated version of the ordinance, after looking at and wanting to make kind of come together a little more with the planning commission version, we are agreeing to remove the regional stormwater management program payment, which is on average has been, at least in the past, about $33,000. And so it just depends on your site, the site conditions and the size of your site, especially. But so projects would probably save $20, $30, $40, $50,000, sometimes even more with this new proposal. That money was being used to put into a collective fund for each watershed that would be used for different projects. So watershed would need to, shift how it a little bit and make sure we cover that. But our department director said he supported that new plan. And then we have grading review by and so right now with the drainage criteria manual system we have in place, we have watershed protection staff is overseeing this, but our colleagues over in DSD are doing the same exact kind of review themselves for other types of projects, and so we would be shifting that over to them for this proposal. All right, the third scenario on this one, and third and final, is that this water would just drain your neighbors. And this, in fact, is what happens with this particular lot in the real world. It just kind of drained right to the backyards of these neighbors. And so our staff proposal is that you would continue, as you do today, to have to put in a small scale detention pond in this kind of project to reduce the flow rate of peak flows coming through your project during a big storm, to have an engineered control there. And so in meeting with some of our development community stakeholders, they had met with some of their engineering colleagues that they work with, and a lot of folks recognize that something of this kind is needed when you have a big enough project and you've got enough water going off. And we do, and this is blue because we're changing this. We staff are wanting to look at some simplified detention options. We heard a lot of good feedback from stakeholders that building detention ponds was, especially for these very small projects, was somewhat cumbersome and complicated and added a lot of cost and time to the projects. And so we will be looking at whether there can be some simplified options such as rainwater harvesting or other systems that might be of use and might even be multi-purpose and helpful. All right, and so then back to the Planning Commission proposal. So this project, if it just stayed within its impervious cover limits, would not have drainage requirements all the way up to 1.5 acres. And so with no regard to the drainage, whether it goes to the road or back to the neighbors. And so again, we staff just really have some concerns with that and don't support having it go to that size, and we don't really think that it would be enough to have this impervious cover limitation. So here's a size comparison. This is a 5750 lot, the old maximum size. So there's a fair number of these lots out there, and it's just kind of the old standard. 9100 is the size of the average lot in the city of Austin that is a SF1, 2, or 3 lot. So I just threw that in for comparison. So you might be able to get 3 homes on that lot. I use a 3,600 square foot thing to show this. So then 11,500, this is our, so anything smaller than this would qualify for the no drainage option. This is 1/2 acre, which is another threshold that was in our original proposal, but for comparison. So this would start having to have in the staff version, this would need somebody to look at where the water is going. And this would be the largest project we would allow just to run into the right of way and so forth. But again, if any of these have some or all of their water running to neighbors, they'll need to either regrade or use detention. And then the planning commission version, requested that it be boosted all the way to 1.5 acres. All right, so I'm going to go to site plan light part 2. These are small scale multifamily projects. They're not 158,000 lots like this. There's far fewer. So there's only 7,000 or 8,000 of these in town at this point that are zoned like this. And honestly, a lot of these are pretty small and probably would have a real hard time putting more units on them that are already there. So anyway, some of our stakeholders have had good comments about the limitations that are already on these projects, these parcels. So here's an example one over in East Austin, where somebody's already built this. It's literally a 1/2 acre site. So it's this in fact is what happens in this particular project, but I'll show you some hypotheticals here too. So it runs off to the street above here. And so they in their project, they just graded it so they got right to the street. And so they would have a simplified version of this where they were able to just show the water going to the street. And so it wouldn't require the same level of engineering. There's going to be an engineer on this project already. They would probably oversee this, but it'd be pretty simple to do this for them for this version 1 of 3. In the next version, again, like the other single family one, subdivision one, this one kind of runs off to the neighbors. In this case was hypothetical. And so you would have to drain it. You have to regrade that and make sure that did not happen in your final plan and implementation. And so with that, you need engineering. You need initially we said, how about a payment and grading review by watershed? So we're updating that for no payment. So again, acknowledging that council is valuing these small scale housing projects and wanting to streamline the process. We know that that's a barrier sometimes, that money. And then the runoff, if it just drains the neighbors and is a problem, then you would put in a detention pond, just like that last one. And again, we'll be trying to come up with some simplified detention options for these smaller projects. Planning Commission for this one as well said, as long as they stay within their 65, usually 60 or 65% impervious limits, then you wouldn't have any drainage requirements, other than just, following state law, self-certification, and all the way at 1.5 acres. Here is this project in reality. And so the water comes out and actually drains into this storm drain inlet. And so we have some separate proposals that help these smaller projects from a cost standpoint with storm drain connections. And I just thought this was interesting. This project put in 10 units on 1/2 acre, but they were able to protect these protected trees and with the type of design they put in. And so I just want to acknowledge that with the home 1 and home 2 and this ordinance, we're holding the line on impervious cover limits, and we're retaining things like tree protections that were already in place. All right, don't despair. I'm getting close to the end of this presentation. I hope this hasn't been too much detail. But this slide shows an overview of some other 4 other cities in the state and what they're doing. So I mentioned earlier that San Antonio has this. It's a little more complicated than this. San Antonio has this kind of 30 square mile area of their original city that has this kind of infill zone where they're encouraging infill, and they came up with this. They initially came up with a threshold of 20,000 square feet, and said you don't have to do drainage extra drainage requirements for that. But they found that they were getting a number of 311 calls and complaints, and so that was in 2015, I believe. Double check me on that. It's not crucial about the dates, but I could get that if you need it. But I think it was 2015. They said 20,000, and I think by 2020 or 2021, they went ahead and adjusted it down, kind of calibrated it down to 10,000. to try to tamp down the number of drainage issues they were getting. So that's really close. I'm feeling comfortable that ours is coming in around where theirs was. They've kind of tested it ahead of time for us, and their projects all have engineering involved in them. This for site plans and subdivisions. Dallas does not make you detain sort of automatically if you're any smaller than a 1 acre, but they actually do require detention to prevent lot-to-lot flows from smaller projects, including single-family projects actually building permits. So this, in a way, this system is remarkably close to what we're proposing ourselves, the staff proposal. But again, ours does not go above 1 acre, just like Dallas. And they do use this applicant signed affidavit, but that again is only for single-family building permits, not for subdivisions or site plans. Fort Worth also caps the development, their detention requirement at 1 acre. And they want their projects to drain in the street rights of way like we do. Houston has a 15,000 square foot detention requirement. Houston is a little different animal. They have very flat terrain and they get torrential, incredible, floods with hurricanes and tropical storms and whatnot. So they actually rely on detention in a different way than Austin does. So I'm not sure how directly comparable they are, but anyway, I'll put that in there. And then so we're proposing the 1 acre to provide detention sort of for, and so think of this when you're thinking of Dallas, you're looking at Fort Worth and so forth, and not putting in detention. That is for the downstream sort of local flood public drainage system, making sure that doesn't have any more pressure on it than pre-project. But in all cases, that you might actually still have to put a detention pond in these different communities if you have lot-to-lot issues. So that's a commonality. Okay, so here's just a graph that shows where we are. So so Planning Commission would extend that up 1.5 acres. A little bit of an interesting oddity. Our little sister city, Rollingwood nearby, actually regulates 200. This is actually a little bit, I should have put a different color on this, but they regulate all the way down to 250 square feet of impervious cover. I think it's a little it'd be a little tricky for a gigantic city like Austin to follow that in those same footsteps. And there's some background on why they do that, but anyway, it's just kind of an interesting a little footnote there. So we staff don't recommend pushing past these other cities. And then here's an overview table that just kind of brings all this together. And I love tables. Most people don't. So, but it's a useful summary to see what's going on for a comparison. And we can come back to this if you want to, but it basically compares where we are today, current code and criteria, and then goes in and talks about the original staff and then so yeah, this is where we are today before anything happens. Here's what our original staff recommendation was, and then here's how we're revising that original staff recommendation. And the blue text shows the changes from here to here. And then Planning Commission over here, I underlined the things that are kind of the major points of difference over here. So, and we can go back, and so it just basically walks you through this smaller scale residential small subdivision, and the bigger one, up to 11,500, no greater than an acre and then 11,500 to 1 acre, and then less than half an acre site plan versus very the larger scale one. And we're hopeful as staff that we've made some progress on getting to a place where the development community feels like, hey, these barriers that were the main point of the staff the city council resolution were to say, hey, how do we streamline this process and make sure that folks can make these projects feasible and have them actually built and have people be able to move into these smaller units that, with more different housing options. So I've already kind of gone through all these, and I'm happy to come back to this chart if you want in the Q&A. And then this is really the same slide I started with, just recapping. We got a council goal of streamlining the non-zoning regulations, providing more housing choices, more infill, balancing the impacts on water quality and drainage, among many other elements. and the fact that we're focusing today on this ordinance on drainage, but that we will be working much more on many other elements like transportation, electrical power, water and wastewater, and so forth. We are looking at the two draft ordinances, Planning Commission's version, revised staff version, going to council on February 13th, unless we're pushed back. And then later, staff is very committed to working on additional non-zoning and elements for the future. And I went through and described these two different proposals, talked about our peer cities, and then now it is a good time to talk about stakeholder discussion. So that's my last slide wrap up. So I'm going to stop sharing, but I can come back to this if needed.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Matt, for overviewing all that information. And a quick reminder for folks that we do have a Q&A function available. So if you think of any questions as we're going through, we'll go through them as they come in. I will also note that I see in our attendees, there's a few folks with the same name, and it just means that they shared their own personal registration link. So I will share also if you, since the presentation portion of today's session is Matt went over it, so you will be missing a lot of information. If you want to, that is the general registration. I'm going to see a few folks shared their own, so I see a few folks with the same name and the questions, they're not seeing their own name. That just means that you shared the registration link from someone else. So I put in the chat, if you want to register under your name, you'll be able to still log in. It might just be an extra step, but if you don't mind being someone else's name, we'll go with it. So let me go ahead and ask out loud some of the questions that we've been receiving. So we had one of our attendees ask Matt for the rest of the folks about the 11,500 square feet. So the minimum proposed site with no drainage is 11,500 square feet. That means that in order to subdivide that lot would have to be exactly 11,500 for an SF 1, 2, and 3 to benefit. If the lot is 11,499, it won't qualify due to that minimum lot size. And if it's 11,501, it also won't qualify. So Matt or anybody else, y'all want to talk a little bit about that requirement?
I'll start off with that one. Yeah, that's a good question. And we had the original staff proposal long ago was one quarter acre was where that stood, and that's 10,000 something square feet. I can't remember the exact number. But we get some stakeholder feedback, and somebody had suggested 11,500, and we went ahead and thought that was an acceptable adjustment. And yes, you would unless you had 11,500 or slightly greater, you couldn't get two 5750 lots, but you could take advantage of the Home 2 ordinance that says you can go all the way down to 1,800 square feet. So you could absolutely subdivide an 11,500 lot into smaller subdivisions, subdivided lots. Brent, did you have some other thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I would just add that, and I apologize if I sound sick. I've been sick, but I'm back at work today and just sort of catching up. Thanks for the presentation, Matt. Great job covering everything. And regarding the 11,500 square feet, I think any sort of numeric limit we have, and I think we need numeric limits. That's how ordinances work. Somebody can always say that, well, what if you're just a little bit above it? I mean, that's just inherent to having limits. But I do want to emphasize as well that I think there's some flexibility built into our process to deal with those situations. And one of them is, for example, if you're doing flag lots, which is going to be a popular development form, it already is, and I think it will become more so for doing the smaller Home 2 lots. The land area that's included within the flag does not count towards the lot area. So we have some flexibility built in for smaller lot development to deal with those situations where you're just barely over the 11,500 square feet. We are also going to be looking at more flexible approaches with respect to balance of the tract waivers and things like that. But there will be cases where you're over that 11,500 square feet for where it's just not going to qualify. But it's important to note also that if you're up to an acre, you're over the 11,500 square feet, but you're up to an acre. It's not just business as usual under this ordinance. This ordinance creates a new path for drainage review that would involve simply having to grade your property appropriately to make sure the water flows to a public right of way or a storm drain feature. And it wouldn't be every drop of water on the property. It would just be the runoff that can be attributed to the proposed development. So yes, the 11,500 square feet is significant. Below that point, it's just the same level of review that would traditionally occur with a building permit, which means no drainage analysis. But if you're over that, there's still going to be some flexibility, greater flexibility than exists today to subdivide as long as you're no more than an acre.
I appreciate the questions that are coming in. I do see quite a few in the queue, so we will get through them as they are coming in. And I appreciate everyone's patience as we go through answering these questions. The next question that I see is the flagpole now exempt from impervious cover calculations?
I can kind of attempt for that. So there are two types of impervious cover calculations. There's the zoning calculations and there's the watershed impervious cover. In the urban core, there are no watershed impervious cover limits. So outside of the urban core, the impervious cover is based on assumptions for subdivision. So when a single family residential subdivision comes in, there are assumptions about how much impervious cover there will be based on the lot size. And so the flagpole isn't really taken into consideration in that point. It's based on lot size and assumptions to make sure that the assumed impervious cover meets watershed impervious cover limits. So once it's subdivided, each lot goes into a building permit review. They will look at zoning impervious cover limits. And so I think, as Brent said earlier, the flag lot is not in the flagpole part of the lot doesn't get included in site area calculation. So I think that would include impervious cover.
Next question that we have is also about the 11,500 square foot. So apologies if y'all have answered. It is mostly comments. So we have staff's intent of this additional to the ordinance is great. However, it's unrealistic for 11,500 square feet to be subdivided into two 5,700 square foot lots. The flag portion of the lot does not count toward the 5,750. The 11,500 needs to be increased to be a realistic number. And so that's one of the comments that we received in our Q&A portion. And Matt, feel free if you have any more context with me. Otherwise, I will continue on to the next question. All right. For applicable infill plats that drain away from the street but have to provide on-site detention / water quality, has staff looked at pushing the drainage water quality review to happen with the building review? This will help the design consultants design together to have a more effective and realistic drainage and water quality.
I can attempt to answer that one, and Matt, feel free to chime in as well. But yes, and the short answer is yes, we have. We're looking at there's going to be one broad point I want to make is when this ordinance, assuming this ordinance passes, which we certainly hope it will soon, we've requested a 90-day delayed effective date, which would mean that all the departments involved in implementing this would have some time to revise our applications, our review procedures, and work to get ready to implement this. And the idea of deferring more drainage from subdivision to building permit is very much going to be a part of that conversation and part of the implementation. We think they're through use of plat notes or just indications in the cover sheets, there will be avenues available for us to start doing that. We think that's in line with a lot what a lot of other cities do in terms of how they analyze drainage. So I think we're very supportive of that. It's not stated explicitly in the ordinance, and I don't think it needs to be. It can be something that we work on administratively. But that's an approach that we're very excited about, and we're committed to finding a way to make it work, at least for a significant portion of the projects.
Thanks, Brent. The next question by our attendee is asking if we can provide a link to the DSC tool that shows the grading and sheet flow by lot. And so if we don't get that by today, we would definitely follow up with that thing. The next question that we have is, can we please clarify on the MF version of the site plan Lite, there is no separate site plan process. Proposed existing drainage is submitted with the building plan review. They ask that as a question.
I think I can try, and then I can be corrected if I'm wrong. But I do believe that it's up to 4 units can now go to residential review. Anything from 5 to 16 is what we're talking about here. But up to 4 units can go straight to residential review. I think that's maybe the question, but if not, you can clarify, but yes.
Thanks, Shadi. And appreciate y'all as we go through these questions. We do have quite a few in the queue, so I want to make sure that I'm mindful and respectful of those who have already asked their question. So I will continue going through the questions in the Q&A at this moment. The next question that we have is, do these updates have any effects on water quality requirements?
And the simple answer is that was no, that was not part of this ordinance to date. That would need to be added in if that were a council objective.
I think that I agree with Matt's comment in general, but I think there is one way in which it really does impact the water quality thresholds, and that is we have proposed changing the assumptions that are used in calculating impervious cover for subdivision. As Liz mentioned earlier, when you're reviewing it subdivision, people are not actually, there's not a building plan element to that. So the only way you can actually discern impervious cover is by using assumptions. And our existing assumptions that are stated in the code are very, very suburban, and they assume a greater degree of impervious cover than is realistic for a lot of the smaller infill lots. So our proposed amendments would make it so that impervious cover is just based on what the zoning impervious cover limits are with the lot size. So the net effect of that, and our staff reports, I can't quote it chapter and verse, but our staff reports include some analysis of this. The net effect of that is that you will be able to create more lots without triggering the limit below above which water quality controls are required, and that is 8,000 square feet. So that 8,000 square feet top line number is not changing, but the way that impervious cover is calculated will result in people being able to create more lots without triggering water quality controls.
Yeah. Do you want to add something to that? I'll go to the next question. Will detention of the 2YR storm still be required if full detention is not?
That's a great question. Jody and Rebecca, my first instinct is to say that we would not, if we weren't asking for detention, we wouldn't ask for the 2-year detention. What are your thoughts on that?
So the 2-year detention requirements is for erosion control purposes. There are ways that you can address the 2-year, especially when there's low flows anyway. I don't know if we've talked specifically about that. I mean, I think I would need to check in with Watershed and get back to you on that specifically. But the idea here would be that, yeah, I mean, I would imagine that it's a low enough flow that you can meet the other requirements of ECM 168 that talks about the 2-year control for erosion control purposes. But I don't, I can check in with our team and get back to you on that one.
Next question in our queue is, so the only time a lot could easily be divided into two lots is if the lot is literally exactly 2 times of the 5,750 minimum lot size. So if your lot is 1 square foot over and you go into more complicated process. So if your lot is at, say, 2 times 5,750 and you subdivide it, you can build 2 units, and if you don't subdivide, you can build 3 units. Is that correct? Or are they missing something?
I think if you, let's just say you had a, instead of 11,500, you had a 10,000 square foot lot. I think you could divide that into 5 2,000 square foot lots in one, in your subdivision process. Does that make sense, Joydeep? Is that, where would you be? So, I mean, you could go beyond 3 units that way.
From what yes, I would say that from what you're saying and what I'm reading, it makes sense. And yeah, I'd go with, I think so.
Thank you, Matt and Jody. Next question is existing impervious cover exempt from the drainage / detention design?
I can try to answer that one. So yeah, I mean, so just like when detention is required, right? Our threshold is basically the difference between existing and proposed, right? And so the question here is, if there's existing impervious cover, would you get quote unquote detention credit for that existing impervious cover? The way we've treated that in any other situation in drainage review is that it depends on when that existing impervious cover was constructed. If it was constructed and permitted, or it was constructed at a time when there was drainage regulations already in place, then we would say it's already there, it's existing, you can count that as existing in your calculations. If it was constructed prior to regulation or after regulations came in and for whatever reason was never permitted in any sort of way, then you wouldn't necessarily get credit for something that didn't have that existing impervious cover accounted for in some sort of way. And it's not a simple answer, I understand, but with our drainage calculations, that's the way we have to kind of set our boundaries of how we mitigate the increase. And so that's how we look at it. We would have to look at when that existing impervious cover was constructed originally.
Thanks, Jody. The next question that I have is, do these standards differ in areas without storm drain infrastructure or in areas experiencing known drainage issues? Matt, you're muted. I see your lips moving. We can see Matt's lips moving, but you're muted.
And I apologize for that. So about that. Yes, that's a great question. We did not distinguish between those 2 areas in this, and so there is each area would be treated the same. The scale of these projects is extremely small, and we've had some other past presentations where I kind of went through and talked about what the impacts are going to be on the local flood drainage systems downstream of these. That is one of the reasons we don't want it to creep past 1 acre, but we think in size, but we think that those differences are not differences in flows to downstream drainage systems are not going to be very great with these at this flooding level for these projects is our contention. But that's a great question, and I think some other cities have looked at that as well.
I would just add that I think a lot of drainage review and the regulations really occur at the administrative level, and so I think during the 90-day period, we're requesting to be able to work on implementation before this ordinance would take effect. I think we can consider and look holistically at what all the requirements are and whether there are ways in which it may make sense to have the requirements be a little bit more relaxed for areas that are outside of the more sensitive drainage areas. So I think that's something we will consider in sort of looking at how to calibrate the review procedures appropriately. But as far as at the level of the actual ordinance, there's not any just geographical or other distinctions made, as Matt said.
Thanks, Matt and Brent. The next question that I have is, you have mentioned detention in certain conditions. How will water quality be addressed?
Water quality, like Brent mentioned, water quality regulations remain unchanged. And so if you had more than 8,000 square feet of impervious cover, you would even need to provide on-site water quality controls, or if you qualify, if you're part of the urban watershed, if your project's within one of the urban watersheds in the central part of the city, you could potentially pay payment in lieu.
Thanks all for continuing. For those who are still tuned in, I'll be going through these questions and I'll go, we still have some time to go through them, so I'll go through them as we get them. The next question that one of our attendees asks is, will a driveway and utility plan still be required in a small lot subdivision? Can plumbing code be modified to allow the sewer water lines to cross property lines if it is in a private easement?
That's a fantastic question. It's one of the ones that would be in the, not part of this ordinance category. Brent, do you want to take that one? Do you know if that's part of the?
Yeah, I need to refresh there's so many requirements in this area of regulation that my mind is a little fuzzy on some of them, but we looked into that and had a lot of discussions with the water utility as well as our building official. And the short answer is that we are committed to making it easier for people to do exactly what you said, which is to place utilities in private easements where necessary to create lots. There are definitely problems with that. There are challenges that presents, but we recognize that it's going to be increasingly going to be something that is required in order to make some infill projects work. The building official has the authority under the plumbing code to approve those sorts of arrangements, and we have spoken with our water utility about it as well, and we'll be coordinating with them. But I don't think it's something that is always going to be allowed, but it's something that I think in a greater number of cases is going to have to be allowed, and we're committed to making that work. And again, that's going to be something we're going to have to look at during the implementation phase.
Here's Brent and Matt. The next question is, one of our attendees shares that they have a site plan with the same drainage conditions mentioned. And if it's possible, they mentioned that they would like to avoid adding a retention pond. They would prefer that. And then they asked if there's somebody they can speak to assess whether it's feasible to forego detention.
You want to take this one, Army?
Yeah, sure. Well, I was just, and then it was going to go to you, Rebecca, at some point.
Go ahead.
But yeah, I mean, it sounds like this is something that's currently or not. It would be going through the process prior to this implementation of what we're talking about today. So under current rules and regulations, if you have a question about a site, you can certainly reach out to me. We don't grant detention waivers currently. The only, a possible option would be RSMP, which would be Rebecca McKay's group. But what I can offer today is, if you want to reach out to me and Rebecca after the meeting, we can talk. Or you can start with me, whatever. But what we're talking about in this meeting today is in future. So currently, we would say that you can reach out to us and we can talk to you about options.
And there is an RSMP, Regional Stormwater Management Program feasibility viewer. There's a website that you can go to with the current regulations and see if your site is potentially feasible for participation in the program, which would be a potential payment in lieu of detention. But as Joydeep mentioned, if these ordinance goes forward, that's when it would change some of the detention requirements. We're talking about, Joydeep and I, the current requirements, but there is that website available, and you can reach out to us.
Thank you, Joydeep and Rebecca. The next question is about the 11,500 square foot requirement. And so thanks for your patience if this was already answered, but I want to make sure that in case that it didn't, that our participant gets their answer. What will the fees be for a subdivision less than 11,500 square feet?
And I think the answer would be there would be no, if there is no drainage review, there would be no drainage fee, right? Is that part of it, Joydeep, with that square?
I think
I think
there would
the
need to
question
be
might be
some-
about application fees, and
Right, which
I don't
yeah,
think we've
broader.
discussed. Right,
Yeah.
and I don't think we've discussed that yet. But go ahead. Sorry.
Right. Yeah, so fees are adopted with the budget every year. And so when there's a new process that's developed, then the responsible department, DSD, whoever needs to look at that process and decide what the applicable fee should be. And so I don't know if there's going to be a interim kind of fee or if it would just be the existing fee until the budget is adopted in August, but maybe Brent can answer as well.
I think Liz correctly stated how it would work. I would just add that I know that that's can be unsatisfying to people, that, procedures change and then it takes a while for fees to catch up. But our system is set up on having fees based on a cost of service study. And so what we're going to have to do is look at the ways in which the review process just costs less for the city based on the scale drainage review. And I think it stands to reason that the fees will go down for these infill projects that don't require the full drainage review. But we're not going to be prepared to propose like what we would call an off-cycle budget amendment to change the fees. Those are disfavored generally, and we wouldn't have the information in the near term to even propose such an adjustment. So I think realistically, it's going to be until next year or later this year, I'm sorry, when the fee schedule is adopted, that we would make those changes. Joy Deep, does that sound right to you? Or are there any ways in which, okay.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I can certainly ask the question to see if there's any other possibility, but that's how we've done it traditionally with any other rules changes.
Thank you. The next attendee shares that the intention is to direct sheet flow runoff toward the right of way, which will in most cases involve runoff flowing over the public sidewalk. Will Development Services Department require additional flow controls to ensure runoff does not become concentrated or flow beneath the sidewalk? Additionally, will there be flexibility to avoid overcomplicating the process of sheet flowing across a sidewalk?
Sure, I would add, I would include that in the bucket of things that once we have the rule in place of how we implement it, that would be in that bucket. And certainly we don't want to create or ease the requirements in one end and then tighten it up on another that makes it impossible. That's not the intent here. So I can't give you a definitive answer other than to say, yes, we would certainly try to look for ways to make it easier holistically for the process, not just one part of it to make it more complicated on the other end. And we'll certainly look for suggestions and things that we can come up with after the implementation of this part of how we actually do the review of those pieces that you're mentioning here.
Thank you, Dorothy. Next question that we have, the 2-unit /lot example shown in your presentation that has 2 driveways, possible IC limit issue. Could a shared parking up front with a walk path be acceptable?
Yeah, I don't have the answer to that question now. We could try to get back.
Okay.
I was using some of the resources we had from our home 1 and home 2 presentations by staff, but
Absolutely. Next question that we have is, will the city still be enforcing connection to the public stormwater infrastructure within 550 feet? We have that answer.
I would add right now that particular thing isn't part of this this proposal and this, but I will say that the evaluation of the 550 feet is under consideration under separate rules changes, but it's not as a part of this particular site plan light and infill ordinance.
and
I would-
watershed go ahead.
We have, so I think Joy Deep is right in a formal sense. It's not in the ordinance. But we have committed in the staff report to watershed protection's credit. They really looked at this requirement and looked at, the economy of scale with respect to infill and when it makes sense. And so we have in our staff report committed to administratively revising that requirement to be better calibrated to infill. And we've given again, to Watershed's credit, we've given very specific delineations of the number of feet at which a connection would be required. And they've also proposed to just have a blanket exemption for really small scale infill projects. So the short answer is this requirement has never been in the ordinance, so it's not proposed to be changed in the ordinance, but administratively, it will very much be part of the process going forward, and we've committed to that in the staff report.
Anything under half an acre will not have to connect. And if you're between half an acre and 1 acre, you would only have to connect if you would need to do an analysis of the gutter flows and so forth to make sure that the existing drainage way can, the right of way can handle the water. But if you can do that, you can also forego that. But if it can't contain that water, we're going to want to see connect up to 300 feet, not 550.
The next attendee, they share a comment about timelines and the housing market. So they share that thanks to development services and others for working hard to lessen timelines and get more desperately needed housing to the market. How can Watershed Protection Department and other departments help move this toward the goal Council and Planning Commission have set for Infill Plat, Site Plan Lite, 1.5 acres, especially with how strongly council supports this? With recent city elections that affirm that the constituents support pro-housing, efficient, effective city governance. So, Matt, I'm not sure if y'all have any comments for this. I know that it is a general commentary, but if you have anything to add for this.
Yeah, that's just right at the heart of the policy question here. And so we staff have tried to balance making this a faster, easier, more streamlined process with making sure we have good drainage outcomes. And so that was the balance we were trying to strike. And we had this existing program within our drainage criteria manual that we've been implementing for the last 5 or 6 years. It's been working well. And so we use that as our framework for this. And so that's why we're not wanting to go above 1 acre. It's getting quite larger once you go up from 1 acre to 1.5 acres. It's a lot more water. And so we think that's why we landed on that number. But of course, that's a policy call that the council ultimately will determine.
And I think the city department's efforts to further council's housing goals extend well beyond just this ordinance. I think when you read the resolutions initiating Site Plan Lite and Infill Plats, this ordinance very much furthers those objectives in very tangible ways. It significantly changes drainage requirements from what exists today, and drainage is one of the biggest cost impediments to infill. So we think it's a meaningful step in the right direction. Additionally, as I've mentioned, our staff report describes numerous administrative changes that staff is committed to making as well. And I think some other, as I think Matt mentioned, there is likely to be further effort made with respect to other departments to look at their requirements as well. And then briefly, a shout out to the TARP, which is the Technical Advisory Review Panel that Bryden Summers, who's here today, oversees. That is a change in our overall process with respect to how criteria manuals are adopted. And on an ongoing basis now, the criteria manual process, which is where a lot of these regulations are housed, is subject to a more robust, holistic review that is in line directly with council's housing goals. That's part of the checklist that's used for rules going forward. So I think there's not one silver bullet in terms of how the departments are responding to council's housing goals, but there are a lot of synchronized actions that are all working together to move the ball forward.
All right, thank you. Next question, and appreciate for those folks who are still tuned in. We do have quite a few questions, so we are doing our best to get through them, and I see more continue to come in. So we will continue to address those to the best we can as we run through this presentation and through this engagement. The next question that we have is, and this one's about water quality. And so if this was already addressed for free, Matt, we might need to reiterate. So how will water quality requirements be interpreted for increasing impervious cover from the existing conditions up to the max allowed impervious cover?
Oops, sorry,
I can
unmute here.
start. Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, you can go. You want to
Okay.
take it?
Yeah, so I mean, water quality in general, except for the assumptions, as Brent mentioned earlier, isn't really changing. And so the current method for determining what is considered necessary for water quality treatment is new or redeveloped impervious cover. And so if you have an existing house and you're not touching it, you're adding new impervious cover, we would look at it. If it's above the certain threshold, then you would need water quality treatment. If you're going to be redeveloping any of the impervious cover, tearing down, rebuilding, that would also count towards the amount of impervious cover that is would be needed to be treated for water quality treatment.
And we
Anything else
didn't,
there?
these ordinances, the home one, home two, and this ordinance, none of them have adjusted our impervious cover limits. So you're not going to have higher impervious cover allowed on these projects pre and post these ordinances. So that would be, now you might have somebody, take a lot that's long had well under its impervious cover limit and decide to go ahead and put it up to the maximum, but the max allowed doesn't change at all.
Great. Thank you, Liz and Matt. Next question that we have is a comment, so feel free to add anything if applicable. So the point is that subdivisions less than 11,500 square feet are really only for home two lots.
I think that's accurate. I'll get somebody to correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, if you have a home one project and you've got a lot that's whatever size, say it's 11,500 and you want to build 3 units on it, you just go get a building permit right now and there is no drainage required. And so this clarifies that if it's that size or smaller, that if you wanted to subdivide it, you would also not have to go through the drainage requirements. Is that, Brent? Yeah. So it's a big deal. I mean, our understanding from stakeholder feedback was that this is a pretty big cost driver for smaller projects. If you had to put in a small scale detention pond or what have you on each one of these tiny projects, that adds a lot of complexity and future maintenance issues. And then next door, you've got somebody who's not doing any of that, but they're putting it in just as a home one or just one single, home with a building permit. So we wanted to make those, given that we don't think the drainage outcomes are at the level that they need this sort of engineering rigor. That's where we drew the line.
Right. We will continue. We have a few more minutes left in our engagement, so I will get through these questions as they're coming in. Next question that we have is, how long will non-zoning elements take to revise? And they comment to trying to commit to a quick schedule. We have an estimate of the timeframe for non-zoning revisions.
I think as far as the criteria manual rules, what Watershed has, if they have rule language prepared, which I know Matt just gave some changes, that they've already talked about and put some information in the staff report. If it's ready to go in terms of the TARP schedule to get that cleared so it can be moved through the notice of proposed rule and become a new rule change, our calendar is open for the next several months, and we'll prioritize these. I think anything that is related to any of these code amendments are going to be our top priority for the TARP, so we'll try to move them forward as quickly as we can, as soon as the rule language is done.
Thank you, Bryden. Next question that we have is, how did the 10-unit project on half acre drain the water across the sidewalk? There's not an inlet to tie into nearby. What do you do? And can we write in something that exempts these projects from the rule requiring us to tie into storm sewer within 500 feet?
And I think we answered the second part of that earlier with a different question, that we are absolutely looking into that for projects 1 acre and down, and especially half an acre and down. Does somebody want to take the sidewalk question? I don't know the answer to that, and I did, draw that super simplistic drawing, so apologies there. How would we get that? Joy Deep, is there a detail showing how we get the water from the site across the sidewalk?
We have some details in place. I mean, I think that goes to the question that was asked previously of situations like that. I think as part of the implementation process that we come up with after this part, that would be a consideration that we would include in that. We do have the sidewalk drainage underneath the sidewalk detail right now. I think it's the detail that I'm thinking of is for rain gardens, but we would use something similar to that to allow drainage through sidewalks. But I'm sure that would be something we would take into consideration as we move forward with implementation of this.
Yeah. Thank you.
Next question is, one of our attendees asks if there are any safeguards in place to protect against investment in properties creating potentially de facto subdivisions. Sure, we'll have the answer for this.
Brent, do you want to take this one? That's a good question. I think there would be concern with folks, kind of just like chaining together quite a few, properties and then creating more impact as a result would be I think the question. Try to get at that, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure I understood the question, but if it goes to the issue of kind of piecemealing, I don't think there's a clear safeguard against that. It's something that we will look at very closely if that starts to become a thing. These are all going to be very small scale projects. And I think there are going to be limits to how land could be acquired to really do that kind of thing, but it's something that we are aware of, and we will be looking to see if that starts to become a common thing. But there is no easy way to address it. But I think it's a good question, and it's something we're aware of, and we will be looking at very closely.
And I love that answer. And also, there's an annual, I think it may even be like every 6 months, but DSD is tracking all this, and there's gonna be an annual report coming out soon at the 1 year anniversary of home. And one of the elements is, they have multiple drainage elements added in there. It's way too early to figure out like what the drainage impacts have been for this, first year. And none of the projects, or very few, have used subdivisions, but that will be tracked and looked at over time. And if something kind of like San Antonio had this moment where they said, look, our earlier regulations, maybe we need to adjust those, and they made an adjustment. So I think we would want to make sure we are tracking that, and council already has that in place. And I think that's a pretty great move.
All right, thank you, Matt and Brad.
Sure,
I do want to
good
do a quick time check. We will be ending this engagement at 1, and we still have quite a few questions, but I want everybody to know that I have the record of them, of all the questions, and so to the best of our ability, we will attempt to address them with our staff, and so attempt to answer those questions that you'll have. So appreciate y'all making those questions, and then keep track of the comments, because there are some comments as well. We have time for maybe 2 or 3 more questions, depending on the length of the answer. So I'll go ahead and go with the next one. What is the plan for street flooding on streets lacking drainage inlets? And what is the plan for the increased water flow in creek beds for flooding of adjacent homes and erosion on riparian damage? I apologize if I'm not pronouncing that right, but let me know if you want me to reread it, Matt, or staff. Or if we have an answer. On the street flooding and street lacking drainage.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. Yeah, we watershed protection have a whole, pretty large scale capital improvement program element of our department that looks at that and tracks different places of most concern. We do a lot of engineering analysis, and then we design and implement projects that correct those problems. And generally, those are of long-standing nature, something pretty hardcore, something that's been in place much longer. We're not expecting the little bitty changes from home one or home two to vary much from the kinds of infill that we were already getting from just individual building permits. So that's it's something we'll monitor and want to make sure that we look at it and take it very seriously. But we will continue to do the good work that we do with the CIP to address those. Rebecca, you worked with that group as well. Is there anything that you think we might need to add to that?
I was just gonna say, since the impervious cover limits are not changing, and to note that all of our regulatory floodplains are based on full development. So these little pockets of development still going only up to the 45% or the other impervious cover limits, they shouldn't change the floodplains. We've already adjusted those temporarily for Atlas 14 and are remapping all of our floodplains currently. So in terms of the creek flooding, we do think that our floodplains represent full development already. And then, as Matt said, we do have a project design and delivery group that works on finding solutions for flooding from inadequate or no storm drain systems in those problem areas.
That's a great question, though, and we know that people are concerned, and we too share your concern and are trying to work on those projects to get that to deliver those results.
Yeah, and I wanted to add, since the question brought up creek beds and riparian damage, so this code is also not affecting our critical water quality zone protections, and so I know there's a lot of existing residences in creek setbacks. We would not allow the environmental code wouldn't allow increased non-compliance in those areas, and you can't add additional units in the floodplain as well. And so, those regulations aren't changing. Just wanted to point that out.
Thank you.
We have time for one more question. So appreciate y'all's patience as we run through these questions. And again, I will reiterate that we do have a record of the questions that were asked. We will attempt to answer that to the best of our abilities. Many slides refer to draining lots to the public right of way or drainage system, implying surface drainage to the right of way would be allowed. Many sites may be within 500 feet of an existing subsurface drainage system. All sites within 500 feet of an existing drainage system, they'd still be required to connect directly to that subsurface system.
Yeah, and that's a good question. That was very similar to one that came up earlier. So we are proposing to change that for projects 1 acre and below, and we will be issuing that as well. Brent, respond to that one as well.
Yeah, and I should have had this handy before this meeting. I wish I could post a link to the most recent staff report in the chat, but our staff report includes an attachment that shows some of the major administrative changes that are going to be proposed as a part of this. There are things that aren't in the code today, and so they're not part of the ordinance per se, but they're very much part of staff's work plan going forward. And amending the drainage criteria manual to change this connection requirement is part of that. And we go through in detail, and I think Matt summarized it earlier, what those requirements will be.
Okay, thanks, Matt and Brent. That will be their last question for now. Appreciate everyone's patience and the questions that you asked. We had a lot of questions come in our queue. Again, we will share a recording of this presentation along with a copy of the presentation as well to folks who registered and to attendees. And then we are keeping a record of our comments as well as the questions and attempt to answer those as well and provide a summary of the ones that were answered for today. Matt, Brent, anything you want to add as we close out?
I just wanted to thank everybody because these are fantastic questions. They run the gamut of concerns. And we've heard a few of them before, but it's extremely useful to get this feedback and to understand where folks are, what their concerns are and what suggestions they might have. So anyway, I'm very appreciative of the folks tuning in and participating today, giving this feedback.
Yeah, I just want to echo that, and this process has really benefited from several of y'all's ongoing contributions and the different stakeholder meetings that ECs has helped set up, as well as offline communications. It's really been helpful, and these are regulations that council very rarely amends. So this whole process is putting into a public process things that normally are just not subject to that level of review or change. So it's been challenging for all of us, but we're committed to making it work. And as Matt said, we're very appreciative of all of y'all's engagement.
That I'll go ahead and say thank you again to everyone. Appreciate y'all's time for tuning in. Appreciate the questions that you asked and appreciate Matt, Brent, and our staff for being available and answering questions. See y'all next time. Have a good rest of your day.
Take care, y'all.